world to a Geula Shlema world.
Thank you. And Rabbi Farkash, what would you say in a little bit more detailed way about B'meshech Hayom, about taking a break B'meshech Hayom during the day?
Come here. You can
I think.
Mommy, can I help you?
Just a moment. I don't have the ability to mute, but I hear that there's someone. Please mute yourself. We have some noise in the background. Sorry, go ahead, Rabbi Farkash.
I want to. I think.
I want to know if we do have, because you have minus numbers. How do you know the things that says we do have, we actually do have?
Okay. So I want to make it a little bring it down the poyel. What does a bocher do in his spare time? Is this question?
Yes.
Yeah. So I think it's the question has there's a few nekudes, there's a few points over here. Some parts of it is also very depending in the mahus of the bocher, and also depending a lot in the different countries and different mentalities. I wouldn't make one guideline, I would maybe divide it into different madreges. I would say, first of all, we have to remember, starting from top, I'm going to go l'mayla l'mato. First, we have to remember what the Rebbe writes in the Siches, the famous Siche, where the Rebbe explains about what's A Tomim all about. The Siche of Achen Shel Pesach, Tov Shel Lamed Vov, which there the Rebbe writes that A Tomim belongs to Temchet Mimim 24 hours. It's not only in time of Seder, it belongs to Temchet Mimim 24/7. So that's like a general outlook that Temchet Mimim is trying to educate the Bachim to understand that you're A Tomim not only in time of Seder, also in your spare time, you also belong to Temchet Mimim. And Mimele, your decisions of what you're doing in your spare time has to be based on that. Now, what should we try to, what would be the best thing, and then there's different levels in that. So, for example, a bocher wants to do something else. A bocher sits and learns. The afsake, the yeshivas always try to make that the bocher should also have all kinds of miftzas and side learnings. And sometimes bochim are learning after Seder much more than they were learning inside of Seder, because of the shluchim and miftzas and some there's presents and prizes. So that encourages bochim to do many things in their own time. Then sometimes a bocher is tired. He doesn't have koyach now to sit and learn. Of course, we should educate our bochim and teach them when they're young, and that's something which in the house should be a very good idea to work on that. That our kids should get used to read. What I mean reading is there's so much about reading Chassidische Sipurei Chassidim, Friedrich Rebbe Siches and Likutei Diburim and Sefer HaZichronos, and nowadays there's so much of the Sipurim of Chassidim. So that's another channel. Yeah, where a bocher should become having all these ideas, and that's another way of, a bocher wants to take something easier and gishmak, the arum of Chassidus. Then there is also the dvarim amutorim. Yeah, so in that, for example, in dvarim amutorim, so there has to be sometimes bochrim. There's some bochrim, and you always have to see who is this bocher and what is his needs. But there's some bochrim that they need. I think one of the questions we'll speak about it later. We're talking about exercise. Some bochrim need some sports. So in that, I know that there's yeshivas which are more v'mizokt be'ad, and some yeshivas are negative. I think it's not the place over here to decide, because each yeshiva or each country also. I live in Argentina, and in Argentina, the football, for example, is not a big aveda. I'm coming from Yerushalayim, and the place I was brought up, it was the biggest Aveire. So I can understand that there is in between. There's a lot of different. So that's, I think it's very individual, and the places and countries and houses and chinuch. Bechlolus ha'inyan is that we have to be very careful not to make the bacher feel that besides learning everything is prohibited, not to make him like there's nothing. Yeah, and a lot of bachim and need to let out their energies and other things. So we have to look for Dvarim HaMutarim also. Then there's another thing I'm going to also mention, which is sometimes that also in home, different every house has is that sometimes it's a good idea when you see your kid has a certain chush, a certain talent to develop in them. Yeah, some talents. Since nowadays, so we are very much trying to watch our children. They shouldn't get lost in Yanim Asurim, and they shouldn't be bored. So sometimes giving the kid a certain it's an environment which is good things, like tziur, like a certain instrument. So that's something personal also, which also I can't make a statement, which is it depends a lot. We should have a mashpia in order to speak to him about it and to know what's the best thing for this kid. But that also is something that sometimes can be very positive if a bacher has a certain davar hamuter, which is doing it in his spare time, helps him a lot. He should be successful in the Chassidish inyanim, in his learning.
So you're saying that these things are acceptable even in the tziur of Tomim, in the outside haYeser Toiv, even in the ideal world of the Tomim, in certain circumstances it would be okay. Art,
yes,
instrument. Yeah. Okay,
yes.
Thanks, Rabbi Sternberg.
Again, I want to make sure that I want to make clear that this is very personal in the level, and that you can't give one black and white answer for all bachim. But a lot of bachim need that. So those are different levels based on which bach you're dealing with.
Thank you, Rabbi Sternberg.
Okay, the last point that Rabbi Farkas said, I feel, is very important. The concept of developing a skill. If there's something that they're good at, doing this in their free time, not just will not be a distraction from their learning. It's actually it's going to enrich their learning. It's the healthiest outlet when it's not a distraction from who they are. It's bringing out their keifas hanefesh, and this is something that will help them in their avodas Hashem. But a general outline of the concept of free time. I think the most important thing is that they should be doing something proactive and not look to be entertained in their free time. When the brain has to rest, it has to rest from a certain activity, but there should be brain activity. Besides when a person is sleeping or in unique circumstances, a bacher should be proactively doing something, developing something, if it's physical activity or if it's music, if it's art, if it's reading something that's somewhat a brain exercise, bringing out something within him. When a bacher in his free time is looking to be entertained, even if it's kosher entertainment, it's something that doesn't develop his brain, and it moves him and makes it harder for him to entertain himself in the hours when he needs to entertain himself, in the hours of learning. So obviously it has to be something appropriate. But within things that are appropriate, we should try to encourage our children to be doing something proactive.
What would you say with regards to a definition for Hasidic music?
Hasidic music is nigunim, number one, that the author is a chassid. And Chassidish Yid that came from Avodas Hashem, where Rabbeim have the ability to elevate a nigun. But I think a point that's being lost today is also the way the nigun is being, the way they're singing it, the way it's being played. If it's a nigun, it could be a nigun from the Rabbeim, it could be a nigun from a chassid, that this came out of his heart by davening. But the beat and the style takes the neshama out of it and brings in a foreign energy that could be sometimes the style of music can be just as damaging as when the author of the music is not an appropriate author. So it has to be edel. It should have the right source, and it should be in the right way. That's the ultimate. What we want our children to have is edel music. So there's, if they're kalim for nechayach, if they could appreciate nechayach and the nigune svadus, that's beautiful. Let them get the authentic nigun. And if they need something a little more, with modern day music, there's still very beautiful recordings that are recorded in an edel way. But what's very important, and even if we feel our children, they need something else, they need to hear other music, not only Lubavitcher music, in that itself, there are edler songs, there are songs with the Yiddish tam, there are singers that still are looking to sound as Jewish as possible, and there are singers that are, unfortunately, I guess, their audience, or for whatever reason, they're trying to sound as worldly as possible. So I think that's a very important line to make in Chassidish music itself, and it gets more obvious when we're, I think we should try to educate our children that their taste for music should be Chassidish music. I don't think we should fight with them if they say, oh, I want to listen to this or to that. If it's Yiddish and it has a Yiddish tam, I don't think that's where we should be putting our battles. But within music outside of Chabad music, it's important that it should have a Yiddish edel tamtit. And there's plenty of that.
So just to summarize what you're saying is, first you have to meet the basic standard, the halachic standard. The teichen has to be kosher, it has to be from a frum person, and so on and so forth. That's a given. And then we want to encourage them to listen to edel, to things that represent a closeness to Hashem, not things that are that represent lahavdil, closeness to secular music. And that's within the broader world of music. And obviously, what's preferred is Hasidic nigunim proper. Yes, right. Rabbi Gordon, would you like to add anything about nigina?
Just say that a song carries a message with it. The composer of the song has a certain message that he puts into the song. And when a person plays this music or listens to this music, the message is communicated, sometimes in a more overt way, sometimes in a more subtle way. The message is communicated. There exists music, the message of which is everything goes, everything's okay. You don't have to control yourself, you don't have to limit yourself, you don't have to have any boundaries, everything goes. And there's another type of music that gives the message that there's an Eibishter, there's a purpose, we're here in this world to achieve something, and we're trying to do it with depth, we're trying to do it with feeling, we're trying to do it with emotion, and the music helps develop those emotions, helps bring out that depth. And of course that you have in a Emesach Chassidische Nigun, which is composed by a Emesach Chassid, as Rabbi Sternberg was saying, coming out of the heart, Bavas Hashem and Yiras Hashem, and when you sing those nigunim and play those nigunim and are in the atmosphere, especially by a Fabrengen, when Bachar are sitting together and sharing together a Barme, Hifach Chassidische Nigun, it can push it, be ma'orer Yer Shamayim, it can be ma'orer Abbas Hashem and Yiras Hashem, and that is definitely the ideal music that we want to be developing and encouraging.
So you're emphasizing the idea that that Negina has a koyach to drive home a message in a very deep way, and that's a quality that Negina has. And if we could utilize it for Chassidus, for instance, Ufaratsta Yom HaKedma is a pasuk Chumash, but there are many psukim in Chumash. But now that Ufaratsta is a Nigin, the message of Ufaratsta is a very powerful message that's brought home by the Nigin. So we want to, as a chassid, we want to take advantage of that and drive home, whether it's a nigin like Im Esak Shamayim or Ach Lelikim Dei Minafshi, or B'cha Hashem Chasisi. All these messages that build the bocher, that build the neshama of the bocher. We want to chaparain. We want to take advantage of that power and chas v'sholem to give that power away to negative messages.
I just want to add to what you're saying. It's not only the psukim that the nigun contains that have a message, but the melody itself and the way the melody is sung has a very powerful message.
Yeah.
Both and in Klippa have.
Yeah. Rabbi Farkash, would you like to add anything about Nagina?
No, I will divide it into two nekudas that we spoke of here. There is the practical question, which music should we allow or not our children, and then there is the more deeper question, what's the gather of music? So I think, so what I see from my experience, last few years, it became very hard to work with Bochrim, with all sugi of music, because it's very easy. You have everything, and the Bochrim, and in every you take you how do you say it? You have in your all kinds of advisors. You have in 1 second you have all kinds of music, and it's impossible. So it became, when we were Bochrim, so the yeshiva was like deciding if you can listen, what's the level, if you can listen only Nechoyach, or you can listen Mordechai ben David, or Avram Fried, or this is already too much or not, what's lower. Now it became, it's so bleak wool, they all, so it's a little hard to, so there's two things. There's one thing is of explaining the limits, you know. There is Chabad Nigunim, which is a holy Nigun, like we spoke over here just now, and then there's Siddish Nigunim, which is more like world Siddish Nigunim, like the names you mentioned, and then there is more grob. So that has to be. But what I saw from my experience speaking to Bochim in Yeshiva is that explaining Bochim, giving Mizman Lizman, being Masbir, explaining what is Negine. What's the koyach negine? What's the power of negine? Chassidus, there's my mother in Chassidus that bring out what's negine in nefesh. What's the koyach of negine? Because most of the bachim think that stam negine is something, you know. You wanna know what's the difference? It's not about what I'm listening what he says. Who cares? But to understand that negine is a very very powerful holy koyach and touches the deepest part of the nefesh. So explaining what negina is, so many times I saw with Memuchesh that helped a lot of bochrim to start respecting and understanding that that negina cannot become something of lowering down and a grobe like that helped a lot of bochrim to channelize and to understand. Why is it so important that Negina should be a pure? Those are the two inyanim. I think we got to explain it. We have to find a way to explain the children, bring out by them through stories, through biurim, through siches, what's the depth of Negina. The mele, they should look at it in a different way, and then each house should have their agboles, what is in our house permitted and what's not permitted.
Thank you. I want to take a moment to speak about, Rabbi Farkash, to continue, about Bocharim that are very bright, Bali Kishrin, and for them to be Matzliach in this Dorim, they understand the Shiurim, they Baruch Hashem, they take advantage of the day, but they have good koiches, they have a good mind, and maybe they have a chush for business. And the question is, they're doing everything they need to do. And would it be so terrible that on their own time, they have an interest in business? You know, you say, oh, he has a mind like a businessman, and maybe he has interests, maybe Bochrim that are over 18 in the stock market, or just to have, part of their mind is also bein azmanim or in the evening about business.
What's the question?
So the question is that okay? Is that something that as a mashpia that you would say, look, a bocher that's a Baal Kishrein, that it's a bright person, it's maybe a good idea that he should cultivate it, or no, he should stay focused on his learning.
Okay, so first of all, we have to see what is the ideal. What does Torah say about it? Yeah, and then we have to see what's practical. What are we doing before? How do we? How do we work with this particular bocha? So looking from halacha Torah point of view, Ilchais Talmid Torah, Rambam, we learned just now. Ilchais Talmid Torah of the Alter Rebbe, Al Pi Halacha, Poshet Al Pi Torah. A person has to know first of all what it says in the books before we come to say our own feelings. So when you a bocher sitting in yeshiva, years of yeshiva, the matore of being sitting in yeshiva has to be learning Torah in a full way. Like the Rambam says, the Gemara says, the Shulchan Aruch says, that it's impossible to be able to be koine, to make Torah part, acquire Torah, make Torah part of your life if you are not totally involved in it. At least a certain tkufa in your life, the only way you're going to make Torah part of your life, it's going to be in this way. Yeah, and there's a lot of archove in that nekude, but that's something which is first of all al pi halacha, second of all mitzad chinuch and adrache of Tomim, yeah, which is that those years, it's not only about knowledge. If you know it's about, like Rabbi Sternberg also mentioned before, that the yeshiva, we want to make Yiddishkeit Torah, that should become your life. So if in the same times you're already also looking for other, you have also other things, and you're starting to fall in love, let's call it, with business and with money, and right away it loses the chayis and learning Torah. But that's the way a person works. So it's impossible. So that's the first nekudah. So that now this is not your time, even though it could be tomorrow. I mean, after yeshiva years, and you feel like that you're not gonna be not made exactly to become a shliach. So of course you can be also a Baal Eisek and serve the Eibishter, and a Baal Eisek, like all Chassidus speaks about, what's a Baal Eisek doing the right way, be a Chassidish Baal Eisek, and do your shlichus through that. Could be that's good, but now it's another tkuf in your life. Now in a tkuf in your life that your life has to become dedicated of learning. Now, what am I doing with my talent? I have a certain talent. So some bachim, they have a business chush. They have like, so bepashtus, and the way I saw from speaking and working with bachim and such. So one of the things that you can help a lot bachim in that is explaining them and showing them that learning Gemara, there's not only a holy spiritual inyan in the learning Gemara, that Gemara develops your business talents. It's it's not, shouldn't be the reason why a bacher should learn. But lepoyel, yeah, for many bachim, it gave them the jump, it gave them the chayes, it gave them like to feel comfortable. A lot of bachim, they don't feel comfortable with the Gemara because they see Gemara like very boring and sugyas which it's not important in my life. I'm negative, and the poyel, you explain the bachim, you should know that the best business people are people who learn Gemara. The Gemara helps you see things much deeper and much further and much. So now you're not in your tkuf in life. Now it's not about making money. Forget about it. It's not now. If you want to be a Yid, if you want to be a Teiri, if you want to make a Yiddish life, you have to sit and learn and forget about other things. But you should know that getting involved in learning Gemara, it's going to help you also at the end of the day when it's going to come time. So don't, it's not going to run away from you, that inyan. You're going to have it in a few years from now. That's more or less, I hope I got across with what I'm trying to bring out what's the message?
Right, Rabbi Gordon, on a slightly from this question to another nekuda, we have sometimes Talmidim who are not necessarily so bright, and mitzad echad, they're concerned about how they're going to earn a living later on, and part of that concern, even a bacher in yeshiva, he might ask himself from time to time, why doesn't he learn a little bit limudei chol in order to help him in Mirz Hashem, that this should be a keli. So the question is two parts. Number one is you have a Talmud who has a worry about Parnassa already now. We know the Rebbe spoke about this many times, that some people, they worry about tachlis, they worry about money already now. And the question is, why not learn something a little bit on the side, that in Mirz Hashem, the only purpose is to provide. It's not that they're interested in the Limudei Chol. Why isn't that a path?
It's a very good question, and a question that many, many people ask. And I think that the Rebbe, in a certain sense, is a revolutionary in this area. I mean, this is primarily a women's forum, and we know that the Rebbe has spoken many sichos directed specifically at women, about the miyaldos ha'ivriyos in Parsha Shmois, about the women who were supim u'b'chaylos in Parshas Beshalach, where the Nekuda, the Rebbe explains that when the Egyptians when Pare made a decree to throw the boys into the Nile, on a deeper level, what he was actually saying is that when a Jewish child is born, the first thing you should do is throw him into the Nile. What is the Nile? The Nile is the fountain of Parnassa of Mitzrayim. And when a child is born, the first thing you start worrying about is, where is this child? He's a boy. He's going to have to one day be a head of a family. He's going to have to support a family. Where is he going to have his Parnassa from? So from day one, you're focused on how we're going to develop his skills of Parnassa. And the Rebbe explains that this way of thinking is so foreign to the Jewish way of thinking. And it was the Jewish women in Mitzrayim, the Miyaldos HaIvriyos, that fought Pare, and they said that's not the Jewish way. When a Jewish child is born, you realize, why was he born? What did he come to this world for? He came to this world on a mission. His neshama came down to this world on a mission to make this world a place for the Eibishter. Lasis leis baruch dira b'tachteinim. He came to this world on a mission to learn Torah, to be Mekayim mitzvahs, and to influence the world with Kedusha. So the question is, how is he going to get the wherewithal? How is he going to have the skills? How is he going to have the inspiration that are going to put him in the best position to be able to fulfill that mission? And that's what we're focused on. And we have to educate our children that the tachlis for which they exist in this world is to serve the Eibishter, and to serve the Eibishter in the best possible way. And the developmental stages of life, the years of chinuch, what we should be focused on more than anything else is how are we going to develop this child in a way that they will be in the best position to learn Torah, to be Mekayim mitzvahs, to spread Yiddishkeit, to be enthusiastic about the Yiddishkeit, to be excited about the Yiddishkeit. What's going to happen with Parnassa? So we know that our task is to do what the Eibishter put us in this world for. The Eibishter's task is to provide us with Parnassa, and to provide us with health, and to provide us with sustenance, to provide us with all the things that we need. We have to do our job, and the Eibishter will do his job. What can we do to make ourselves more receptive to the Eibishter's brachas? So I'm going to say in a nutshell, we know that Atem hadveikim b'Hashem Elokeichem chayim kulchem hayom. You who are cleaving to Hashem, your God, are all alive today, the pasuk says. In other words, chayim, life, and sustenance comes from the Eibishter. And the more we are davik in the Eibishter, the more we cleave to the Eibishter, the more we connect to the Eibishter, the more we devote ourselves to the Eibishter, the better position we are to receive the Eibishter's brachas. Now, of course, when the time comes, the Torah says, "Uberachecha Hashem Elokecha b'chol asher ta'aseh." So we can't just sit with our hands folded. We have to do what is necessary to earn our parnassa in whichever way that's going to be. The Eibishter will direct us and will guide us and will provide for us. We're going to have to do what we have to do. But the Rebbe's shita very, very clearly is that in the developmental years of a bacher, there shouldn't be what we call tachlis zuchen. We shouldn't be asking ourselves, what's going to be the tachlis? How are we going to provide for ourselves? It's not of our concern right now. When the time will come, we'll deal with it then. Right now, we have to figure out the most important aspect of our existence is that we need to be servants of the Eibishter and fulfill the mission for what the Eibishter sent us to this world for. And we have to be uniquely focused on achieving that, and achieving that in the best way possible. So if the question is, what do you do if you have a bacher who is in a certain situation where if he's not going to develop a certain thing, he's going to become frustrated and he's not going to be able to serve the Eibishter properly? That's a question for a mashpia and it has to be worked out. But if we're asking the general question, what is going to be at a later stage? Should we worry about it now? So there's no question about it that the Rebbe's position on this is that we should not be focused on that now. We should not be worried about that now. Right now, we should worry about how we're going to develop this child that serve the Eibishter with love and with enthusiasm and with devotion and with excitement, and that he should develop to be the best Yid and the best Chassid that he can possibly be. And we have to do our task, and the Eibishter will do his job. I'm just going to mention one more small nekuda. I mentioned before Parsha B'Shalach about the women dancing the Sutton and the way the Rebbe interprets that. In Parshas B'Shalach, it starts off with the story of Kriyas Yamsuf, and it finishes with the story of Milchemes HaMolek. And the Rebbe asks the famous question, when it comes to Kriyas Yamsuf, so the Eibishter says to Moshe Rabbeinu, Hashem yilachem lachem, v'atem tachrishon, the Eibishter is going to fight for you and you should be silent. When it comes to Milchemes HaMolek, the Eibishter says to Moshe, go and wage war with Amalek. So the question is, why did the rules change? By Kriyas Yamsuf, you were supposed to sit with your hands folded, and the Eibishter is going to wage war for you. And by Amalek, you suddenly have to go wage war. So the Rebbe explains in a nutshell. He says like this: what did the Mitzrim want by Kriyas Yamsuf? The Mitzrim wanted to either drive the Yidden back to Mitzrayim, or they wanted Chas v'Shalom to annihilate Klal Yisrael. Whose task is it to protect Yidden? It's the Eibishter's task. So Hashem yilachem lachem ba'atem tachrishon. The Eibishter will fight, and you can be silent. The Amalekim wanted to prevent Yidden from going to Matan Torah. They wanted to block Yidden from going to Matan Torah. Whose job is it to go to Matan Torah? Whose job is it to connect with the Eibishter through the Torah? That's our job. And if somebody comes and tries to stand in the way of a Yid connecting with the Eibishter through Torah, we cannot just be complacent. We have to go out there and wage war with Amalek. So if somebody's preventing our child from learning Torah, from being Mekayim Mitzvahs, from having a chinuch that gives him enthusiasm and Yiddishkeit, we have to deal with the matter. We have to make sure that this is not the case, that the child grows to be an enthusiastic Yid. If there's a problem that we don't know where the child's chinuch is going to come from, where the child's Parnassa is going to come from, that's not our ASIC right now, right? That's the Eibishter's problem. He will work it out. He has a good track record, and he will work it out. And Be'ezus Hashem, the Eibishter will give everybody Parnassa B'Harchava, and very, very soon, in any case, the world is going to be filled with Madana Mitzuyim Ka'afar, and everybody's going to have everything B'Harchava G'day.
Thank you very much. If I may, so one of the nekudas that you're saying is that the Rebbe expressed that the thinking of young people about money, the fact that young Bachurim, 13, 14, 15-year-olds are thinking about Tachlis, that's not the natural state. Hashem didn't create the world that way. The environment around us, it's a goyish way of thinking that already from a young age, people think about money. And that's not the way it should be. And the second akud is that in general, the Eibishter cares for us. I want to mention, Benegeh, what you're saying, that, the Rebbe's approach with regards to Meiser, while you find many Rabbonim who talk about how if people don't earn enough money, then you can't be Mechayev Meiser to give Meiser because they don't have enough money to pay their bills. And by the Rebbe, it's the opposite. If you need money, you give Meiser. In other words, that a Yid's Gashmias should be completely by Hashem's rules. We have a Torah. The Torah works in the Gashmias, the world. And don't just learn Torah in Seder HaYeshiva. Live a life that's based, even the Gashmias of your life should be completely reliant on what the Torah tells us. So Yashakech, for that Nekudah, Rabbi Sternberg, I want to ask you to address a little more the Limudei Choil aspect. In other words, why is the Rebbe so determined, so to speak, against the idea of learning Limudei Choil if the purpose of it is only Parnassa?
So a few short points. And perhaps we could use these points to explain this to our children if they're bothered by this question. There's a time for everything. And we talk about the responsibility that we have to support our children, to make sure they're not lacking anything. And sometimes there are bachrim that say, I grew up in a home where we were lacking. I don't want my children to go through that void. I don't want them to suffer. I want them to be happy, to have everything they want, not to feel deprived. So I feel most bachrim relate to the following point. It's true, a child that grows up in a home where there's a financial crisis, this is something that that hurts. But there are other crises at home. There are children that grow up without a father they can look up to. Their father's not a role model, not in being a mensch and not in being a yid. And the father can't help the child with their homework. They can't guide them in their struggles in life. And what does a child feel like when there's a void in leadership at home? A void of a role model at home. And sometimes, most of the time, the damage, the void, the suffering of the child, when there's a spiritual lack of Parnassa, is greater than a physical void. And there are some families that there is a struggle in Parnassa, but if the parents are happy people and they carry that struggle with grace and besimcha and betachin, the feeling at home is not that poor us and that we can't afford that. We have a different style of life and we're happy, we're proud. And they carry themselves well because they have emunah and betachin. And when there's emunah and betachin, even when there's a physical crisis, whether it's financial or medical or others, the children go through it with grace. They see their parents going through it with grace. And therefore, the most important thing that parents have a responsibility towards their children is to give them spiritual parnassa, to feed them with spirituality. And like Rabbi Gordon said before, the Eibishter is the one that gives the physical parnassa. Kol bidei shamayim chutz me'yirei shamayim. No one can give our children. No one can be a father instead of us, a mother. No one can be the educator. No one can take that role. Parnassa that the Eibishter is going to take care of. And therefore, it's so important that when we're developing our Yiddishkeit, when we're developing our foundations, it's pure. And there's nothing else involved. The first layer, the foundation of who we are, is pure Yiddishkeit, without anything else. That's where our identity is. And when we're laying down those foundations, it has to be solid. There can't be pockets of air inside. There can't be, styrofoam instead of concrete. It has to be solid because this is what everything is going to be on. And the Rebbe wants that, especially the first 9 years, the Rebbe very, very much emphasized that the yesodus of a person, the earlier years, when they understand less, they're being formed more. Even before birth, the character of the child is very much being affected, perhaps more than after. And the more they understand, really, the less they're absorbing. They have filters. Until the age of 9, when a child is just a sponge, taking in anything, that's when you want to be most careful in only Kedusha going into a system, because everything that he's going to look at in life, he's going to look through the first layer of his education, which is his childhood, till the age of 9. So definitely till the age of 9, the Rebbe didn't want anything secular in their system because they don't really understand too much at this age. They're not very developed, and that's exactly the issue. This is when they're absorbing things without any filters. This is going into the first layer of their personality. And that has to be pure, that has to be Kedusha. Anything they're going to do in life, any experience they're going to go through, anything they're going to learn, they're going to be looking through the lens of the first layer of their education. And in general, until someone has his knowledge of Torah, and someone has they're fully developed and they have a Torah integrity, they're not prepared to deal with the secular world. They're not prepared to deal with business. Once someone has his yesodus, he has his foundation straight, and he has a Torah integrity, then when a question comes up and what's appropriate for Parnassa, he knows the answer. Is that okay to do in business? Is he going to do things with honesty? Is he going to be giving his meiser? Will he take a job that could jeopardize his Yerei Shamayim? Well, if the first thing that's on his mind is money and Parnassa, and that's a foundation, then that's number one. And for being able to support my family, that justifies anything. But if my first Yesod is no, my first Yesod is my Yiddishkeit, is my relationship with the Eibishter, is my learning Torah, then I can only take a job that's going to fit with my personality, with my character that was developed in a pure education, and the way I'm going to run my business, and the integrity, the honesty, the tzedakah. It's all going to be through the lens of Torah. But if the first lens is affected by a secular view, then that affects the way we look at Torah, instead of Torah affecting the way we look at this world and our physical responsibilities.
Yasher Koyach. Rabbi Farkash, would you like to add something about the Limudei Chol? Would you like to add something?
I think the nekude that we have to know over here, the nekude ikris, I think it was already said. I'm only maybe trying to bring it out from another angle. The nekude is that to be able to explain ourselves, the parents themselves, and then the mele, the kids understand it. Yeah, and there's 2 points of view. One nekude is the nekude of emunah and bitachon. Yeah, and that's what the Rebbe was fighting so much. That's why we see in the siches of the Rebbe, and the first halakim lekuti siches, and the first years of Nesius, the Rebbe was fighting about it, farbrengen after farbrengen after farbrengen. You had to educate the mindset of Chassidim. And like Rabbi Kaplan mentioned also, that the Rebbe would dedicate every farbrengen a special sikha for women. And we saw every time there was a official farbrengen, the Rebbe would speak, especially one sikha would be dedicated for the women. And always the nekuda was, you saw the Rebbe was working very hard in the first year especially, and on this Chassidim mindset, on having clear, changing the Goyish mindset, the world, say that all preoccupation, that all daige, that all worry, be'etzem comes from the world, comes from the Goyish, from the secular world. And in order to have that, your mindset in the right way, you have to constantly learn the siches and understand and getting that nekuda very clear, about the yeseides of zones oilom kulo betuve bechem bechesed berachmim, and having it clear and telling it to yourself and telling it the mail to your children, and they should have that very clear, that there's no worries. We know that's the reality. Parnassa will help. It's going to come in the right time. Number one. Like the Rebbe mentioned many times, and you see that the Rebbe had to clarify it. So of course we have to clarify it. In the first years, the Rebbe said, you shouldn't think that I'm not worried because I don't care. Like the Rebbe mentioned many times, some people think like whatever. I'm not. So the Rebbe said, I do care, and I of course I want that the Chassidim should have al-chaveh. Says your child have to understand it's not a pshat, it's like you're not carrying it. No. Yeah, it comes from a very deep place of emunah bitachon in the Eibishter, and knowing that's one nekude that we have to constantly work on ourselves, and memele, it's gonna also become reflected in our children. And the second nekude is also understanding the difference. What are we doing in the young years, yeshiva years, school years? Legabe, what are we doing afterwards in life? In yeshiva, you're learning what's life. Teire, Yiddishkeit is going to be your life. Parnassa is going to be what you're doing. And that definition with who am I and what am I doing, having it very clear. So yeshiva is a kufa in life that you have to be what you are. And that's what you are getting in yeshiva. You're not getting information. You're not getting knowledge. You're getting life. You are becoming something. And then what are we going to do? So that's going to be based on you're going to. So then you'll come to the decisions, and when time will come, that more or less those two nekudas, I think it's important to have clear on them.
Yashikoyach. Rabbi Farkash, I want to continue with the next few questions that I have are more questions, side questions. So obviously, when a bacher is in yeshiva, we have a dress code, and we dress a certain way. But generally speaking, Chassidus Chabad focuses on pnimius. So the question is, why is it so important how a bacher dresses? Let's say not in during Seder, but on his own time. Why does it matter if the ikar is the pnimius? Rabbi Farkash.
Yeah. So the Gemara Masechta Brachos, the Gemara says that when there was the whole argument between the Tanoim about what kind of students we should let in yeshiva, and the expression of it there, the Gemara, Talmid she'ein toichoi keboroi. Yeah, a Talmid which is pnimius does not fit with his chitzonius. Yeah. So that lotion the Gemara is using there about the whole argument that was between Tanoim. What are we doing if a Talmid is inside, is not like his outside? Yeah, should we let him into yeshiva? Shouldn't we let him into yeshiva? And there was all that thing going on over there between the Tanoim about that. So what do you see from this Gemara? You see that the things, in order that it's toichoi keboroi, the inside like the outside. In other words, the outside, the bottom, what's going on outside in his behavior has a very strong impact of his inside. Yeah, the problem is what's going on if the inside is not like the outside. So what you see over from this Gemara, yeah, that the body, the outside for sure has to be clear, has to be in a certain way. Now, using that term, Chabad is pnimius, yeah, and that's why clothing are not important. It's not an exact expression, way of seeing things, because we see in Sayin Chassidus and Sayin Al Pi Torah, Al Pi Halacha, yeah, that the pnimius of a person is being very much affected dafke by his chitzonius. And all Torah mitzvahs is based on the poil mamish, the way a person behaves, that what makes is pnimius in many inyanim. Yeah, there's a famous line, the famous lashon, the famous line brought down in Chassidus many times in Sefer Achinuch. Yeah, achrei ha'peules nimshachis halevavis. That the nature of a person is that his heart, his pnimius, is being pulled after his peules, is the way he's acting, the way he's doing, and that makes many times a lot of ashpah of his pnimius. That's even mitzad al pi niglet Torah, al pi halacha, and that's the whole source. Lefi the Sefer Achinuch, most of the mitzvahs come from that place. Lefi the Sefer Achinuch, what makes a person his pnimius comes very much about the way he's behaving. Yeah. Now, the Chassidus Chabad is emphasizing is don't get stuck on that. Say don't stay in there. Sometimes some places, some communities, they are so much involved in the chitzonius, and it stays there. Chassidus Chabad has a whole different outlook and explains you, yeah, that the pnimius is the iker and the nefesh and the id, but if there's no chitzonius, the pnimius is never going to happen. There's a maimer of the Rebbe, beautiful maimer of the Rebbe, very short maimer, but that's a very powerful maimer, which brings out that nikud al pichsides, which the Rebbe over there brings, the maimer based on the Alter Rebbe's maimer, which brings out the keyach that we see in Levushim. Yeah, that Levushim has a very strong power of making the person. You see, v'gashmias, it doesn't have to be the Gashmias. You see when a person is clothing, yeah, is verschleppt, is schmutzig, is not mesuda physically. So the nefesh by him also makes it. His personality becomes also in that way. And a person, the Alter Rebbe brings different meshalim, yeah, of in life, where you see that the way a person sometimes acts bechitzenius, doing peules, that makes his nefesh. That's the keach of Levushim. But he can't avoid Meirecha. Brings out the power that Levushim has. He brings over there. The Rebbe brings that Maimah, the story of the Alter Rebbe. The Alter Rebbe, Chassidus Chabad. He was the Yeseid of Avedet Penimis, Chabad. And that story comes that the Chassidim, that Misnagdim were taining to the Alter Rebbe, the Chassidim are not real. Yeah, they're doing things bechitzenius, and they're doing things only, they're making themselves as if. And the Alter Rebbe said, Adarabbe, that's what makes a person working on himself and doing things, even though he's now not, but eventually that becomes his panemius. So that's a certain mistake that we're using the words, without understanding. People are using, you hear you say something and you're building out of it a whole shita, yeah, not understanding what's the depth of it. Of course, Chabad demands panemius, but one of the ways out to get to the panemius is making sure that your chitzenis is done the proper way. And that is a lot of details, but that's a certain nekude. I'm sure there's other the rabbis have more yonim to hand in that.
That's Shekayach. Rabbi Gordon, would you like to add something about the clothing?
I'll make 2 points. First of all, along the lines that Rabbi Farkash was saying, there's a term that everybody's familiar with called self-image. A person's self-image has a tremendous effect on them. And a person's self-image is very much influenced by the way they see themselves, including the way they physically see themselves, the way they're dressed. The person is dressed like a Chassidish Bacher. He has a self-image of a Chassidish Bacher. And especially when it's outside of Yeshiva and outside of Seder. If a Bacher is dressed like a Tomim, the way he understands that a Tomim is meant to be dressed, then he sees himself as a Tomim, who perhaps at the moment is doing only 75% of what a Tomim should be doing, or 80% or 90%, but whatever. He's having a break, it's summertime, it's this, it's that. At the end of the day, who is he? He is a Tomim. And therefore, to the extent that he can, he lives up to that expectation and that self-image. If a person dresses in a way that he doesn't look like a Tomim, so he doesn't see himself as a Tomim, he doesn't expect of himself to behave like a Tomim. And that, chas v'shalom, can be very detrimental. I'll share with you something that I use sometimes when I see a bacher doesn't see the importance in appearing like a Chassidish bacher. I say to him like this: if the Rebbe would have a physical son, I want you to close your eyes for a minute and think about what that physical son would look like. Just imagine in your mind what he would look like, how he would dress, how he would behave, what he would look like. And then once you've achieved that, you've drawn a picture in your mind of what the Rebbe's physical son would look like. Now I say to him, I want to tell you something perhaps you never thought of. The Rebbe does have a physical son. And that physical son is you. We're the Rebbe's kinder. As Rabbi Farkash mentioned earlier about the Rebbe's bracha, Erev Yom Kippur, the first year that the Rebbe gave the bracha, Tavshin Yud Beis, the Rebbe called the Bachrim into his room, and he told them, you learned in the Rebbe's yeshivas, I hear the Rebbe's kinder. You learn in the Rebbe's yeshivas, so you're the Rebbe's children. So if you're the Rebbe's children, then you have to live up to being the Rebbe's children. And it starts with on a very, very superficial level. And I know it's superficial, but superficial is important as well. You have to look like the Rebbe's child. And when you look like the Rebbe's child, it encourages you to live up to that expectation and to behave that way. And of course, as mentioned, it is a chitzonistic thing, and 95% of our energies and our focus should be on pnimius. But that 5% that needs to be in developing the image that gives us the self-image in which we structure that pnimius within is definitely very important, and it shouldn't be overlooked.
Rabbi Stern, would you like to add something?
I connect very much with what Rabbi Gordon and Rabbi Farkash explained. Just to add a few points. If there's a doctor that has an issue with wearing a white coat, and he feels, no, it doesn't look good enough to wear a white coat, he wants to walk around the hospital or his office wearing something else. If there's a policeman that's embarrassed to walk around looking like a policeman, a fireman. Now, none of these are very fancy, stylish clothing at all, but they each walk around proud, wearing that which reflects what their identity is, what their mission in life is. And when a Bach is saying it's chitzonis, it's not important, it might be chitzonis, but what it's reflecting, the fact that he wants to look in the mirror and see something different than a Chassidish Bachar, is showing that there is an identity crisis. So that's number one. This that they're looking to wear something else is reflecting on something very deep in the inside. And then there's the other side. It's explained in Chassidus, the concept of makif de klipa. And it says that in a way, when there is an issue in our appearance, in our makif, in our external, in our clothing, it's worse sometimes than very grave aveiros. Because an aveir is a weak moment. This is a moment I fell through. I was tempted and I lost myself and I did something terrible. But this is not who I am. This is not how I see myself. But when this is my appearance, this is my general, the way I give off, what are the vibes I want to give off? And this is who I am. And this, in a way, has a much stronger influence on the nefesh. And again, is expressing something very deep. There's a story of the Chafetz Chaim asked the Rebbe Rashab why he doesn't, why he makes such a big deal of not shaving the beard, and he doesn't make a big deal of, about Lashon Hara, which is a lot worse. In his opinion, it was a lot worse. Lashon Hara, there's so many Yisurim, and shaving the beard is something that there's many shittas that say it's only Derabanan, it's not a Deiraisa. But Lashon Hara is Keneged the Gimel Dvarim of Yeharik V'Aliyaver. So the Rebbe Rashab said, definitely Lashon Hara is a terrible thing. No one wakes up in the morning and has a special Lashon Hara kit and stands in front of the mirror and says, I'm going to be a Lashon Hara type of Yid. No one does that. It's a weak moment. It's a terrible moment, but it's a weak moment. It's not who you are. When you get up in the morning, you own a special machine and you stand in front of the mirror and you're looking, how goyish am I going to look? How much am I going to get rid of the natural Yiddish look? This is who I am. This is the way I'm carrying myself. It's a lot worse. And there's the issue with the beard. There's a Derabanan, there's a Deiraisa. According to us, Chassidic Chabad, we follow the Tzemach Tzedek. It's a few Yisurim Deiraisa. But there's the point of, what do I want to look like? And what I want to look like shows on who I think I really am. And also there's the koyach of Levushim have an effect on us, like Rabbi Farkas said before. When I dress in a certain way, it brings out a certain mannerism. When I dress correct, I act correct. This is a side point. There are those that do make an issue of having the shirts tucked in. Should Bachrim go with their shirts out? Is it okay for them to walk around in flip-flops with Crocs? Should they be wearing correct, shoes and look? The fact is, I'm not saying this is something we should put our emphasis on these details. When a person is dressed in a certain way, he lives up to the way he looks, and it brings out a certain mannerism. I hope I'm not taking too much time. A very interesting story. As a Bachar, I went on Mivtzayim to stockbrokers. And Merrill Lynch and Morgan Stanley, very chashuv stockbrokers. And the first years that I went, they would harass me why I'm not wearing a tie. They used to go Holfen, one Friday I come, and everyone's wearing jeans and t-shirts. No one's wearing a tie anymore. I was all excited. I said, what happened? He said there was a new policy, casual Friday. All the stockbrokers are dressing casual on Fridays. Beautiful, what could be better? Now I look like the biggest businessman on the floor. It was then, I think it was in Samaches, it was Nunches was the big, when was the big crash, when the market crashed? Suddenly I came Friday and everyone was again in their suits and their ties. I said, what happened to Casual Friday? He said, well, people are nervous about their money these days. We feel that they need to be able to trust the stockbrokers, that they're responsible people. And we feel that they feel that we're going to think twice before we buy or sell something if we're wearing a suit and a tie. And that was a very powerful lesson. When we're dressed proper, we act proper. It brings out, and I'm walking around, I look like a Chassidish Yid. I have to live up to that. And that's a certain shmirah. When we are dressed in a certain way, it demands and it makes us think twice before we go somewhere or do something.
For the story and in general, just a quick note, someone's asking about the white shirts. I just want to mention that when I was a bacher, the dress code wasn't limited only to white shirts. Bacherim wore different shirts. However, at a certain point, many different style shirts became introduced. It was about the time when there were collarless shirts and other styles with buttons in different places. And at that time, the Anholis decided that even within the shirts, it's necessary to limit to the white shirt to look like Talmidei Yeshiva, and that there shouldn't be such an emphasis in the way they're dressed compared to what goes on in the world around them. Rabbi Sternberg, you mentioned the beard. So I just, to ask the question from a different angle, we see that there are many Yidden that are Yereim Mushleimim. We see many Fruma people, and they don't have beards. So I understand you mentioned that Tzemach Tzedek, and I'm going to ask Rabbi Farkash to address this. Why is it that in Chabad there is this emphasis on growing beard?
Okay, so I want to clarify it over here, because I think we are making it very general. Putting in everything in one package can make sometimes for some people to make a mistake. Speaking about the whole inyan of clothing, levushim, of chitzonius, there is many things which are not in the same level. We have to understand that there's different subject and in that itself. Because one thing is speaking about like the question of about a white shirt, which is and that includes a lot of details which yeshivas put emphasis on it, which is one inyan. Yeshivas usually has a certain, every yeshiva have their rules, and they have the rules of clothing and pants and shirts and shoes and yarmulkes, and there's a lot of document and machloikes going on between the Bochrim and Anole, and this, why you're making all mitzias. So that's one sugya. Another sugya is the Chassidish levush, which is the general Chassidish levush, hat and jacket, and then there's a third inyan, which is the inyan of a beard. I want to divide it because it's not, we're speaking about it together. It looks like it's either or, it's all in one, it's all goes into the same Darkei Achsidus, but it's not exactly. Those are different inyanim. So the question was about a beard. So the beard is, of course, something which is totally different, even though it's also chitzonius. But in that chitzonius is something which is including the raise. So it's a whole different ballgame. It's a whole different reggae. So number one, speaking about the inyan of a beard, even though like Rabbi Kaplan mentioned that in other communities you can be without a beard and be Yerei Mishleimi. So like the way the Rebbe explains it in many letters, I think it's known, is that there's certain inyanim which have to do with communities, with halacha, even though Iraise, what is has to do with different minhag hamokim, al derech dugme, only to bring a moshe. In Pesach, there's the communities that kidneys are mamish like chometz, Yeah, and they're not going to touch anything which has to do with kitnias. And by other communities, kitnias is the whole Simcha Sachag of Pesach. If you are Sfarik, from a Yid, you're going to be Mahadon in kitnias. And if you're going to be Ashkenazi, so it's going to be for you the Gefela. So there's many inyanim, kashrus, in yoni halache, which for a certain community it would be osur, and another one is going to be muter or even a mitzvah. So here you have one of the most interesting inyanim is the inyan of a beard, which the inyan of a beard in halache. Yeah, there's the question about mitzad halache. What is the halache in the inyan of a beard? So in that, there's a machlekes aposkim, and a machlekes aposkim became comes out, and in a certain inyanim, in certain cases of the way you are cutting your beard, which lefi kamo shites, it's going to be osur even with the iraise, and if the other shites, it's going to be osur with the rabbanon. If other shites, it's going to be not even osur with the rabbanon. Yeah, there you can find a heter for it. Yeah, there's al derech there we have also in Cholov Akum. There's many inyanim which halacha depends very much. So then comes the halacha which is brought down, and then many inyanim in halacha that if you belong to a certain community and you are trying to take heteirim from a different community, so you're not allowed to do it. Yeah, if you belong to the city of Rab Nachman, you have to behave like Rab Nachman, like the Gemara says. And if you belong to the city of Rab Yehuda, you have to be Rab Yehuda. And if you're going to change, so you're going against halacha, against Torah, it's a lack of Yirah Shamayim. So b'meile, so that's mitzad halachic, being us Chsidei Chabad, that we are holding lefi the shita and halacha. It's a machzedek that the Rebbe brings, that paskins lefi the poskim, that's a midoiraise. So b'meile, the inyan of having the beard has to do with the inyan of the iraise. That's number one. Number two, in the inyan of a beard, when it comes to chsidis and pnimis hateire, we are chassidim and we're learning pnimis hateire, so then we have what the Zohar says. So you explain what the Zohar, you tell the person, what does the Zohar say? The Rebbe writes in many letters, the words of the Zohar, what's the importance of the inyan of Tzelem Elikim, and that the beard represents Arichampin, and we all need with the Sarachmin, so then it because it has a whole higher, deeper, more spiritual meaning to it, being careful in that. And then there's a third nekudah, which may be a more practical nekudah, which has to do with what we spoke before. The question that I heard it once in the name of the Tzemach Tzedek or the Rebbe Marash, I'm not sure, but I heard it in the name of Rabbein. That someone asked them about why do we make so much adgosha in the inyan of a beard? Why is it so important? There's other Avedas more important. Before we heard Agishmak's story that Rabbi Sternberg said, but there's another story I heard, I think from the Rebbe Marash, that he said that they brought out why beard is so important. So he brought a marshal like he said, like a flag, like a degel, a flag. When there's a war, and there's two countries, two nations that are fighting on one shetach. To who does it belong? And there's all milchama going on. And then when one of the two nations when they are winning the battle, so you take a flag and you put a flag, and that belongs to us. So he says the flag. What is a flag? A flag is not as the chiyere is no what. It's a few dollars. What is it? The whole shetach over here is a ganze medina. Putting a flag, it's a kind of a shmate. Taking a piece of cloth, you're putting it on a stick. That's what. But in that flag is brought out to who does this country belong to. So that's what it said. The beard could be a small thing, but in that, the way you use the beard, you say having it, that shows to who you belong to. That's like a certain even abeichen that you belong to the Eivishter. You belong. That makes your where do you belong to? So that was another nekude that we have to. I think there's a story also over here. Rabbi Gordon, there's a famous story with his father. Yeah, that has to do with the union of the beard. It is Zayder Geichen on Gordon. Maybe he should tell the story because he's Ben Achaben.
So Adarabah, Rabbi Gordon.
Oh yeah, the story crossed my mind, but now that Rabbi Farkash mentioned it, I guess I should tell it. My father grew up as a teenager. He came to America and was 13 years old in 1934. In those days, a bacher with a beard in America was a non-existence. There was no such thing. There were older Yidden with beards, but a bacher with a beard didn't exist. My father's beard it came to the age where his beard started to grow. It was a big question, it was a big nisayon. What does one do? There were no bachrim with beards in America. It looked completely. So my Zayda, understanding the situation, he said to my father, I'm not going to tell you what to do. I just want to share with you a story. My Zayda was a sheikhet. He shechted in a shlachtois on 10th Avenue in Manhattan, and 10th Avenue and 42nd Street. And he said he was once on his way to work, and he came out of the subway station, and he saw a crowd running. So he thought that it was on his way home from work. I'm not sure what it was. Anyway, he saw a crowd running, and he thought there was an accident. Everybody's running. So naturally, he also started running. So a woman came over to him, and she said, Rebbe, you're also running. So he said, what's happening? So she said, a new movie theater opened up, a new play, a new thing opened up, which wasn't so mahadrim and mahadrim. It was very questionable. So everybody was running. So my grandfather said to my father, he said, imagine if I didn't have the beard and I didn't look like a Rebbe. Very Facebook wird eingefallen. You never know. Baruch Hashem, the fact that I looked like a Rebbe, this woman approached me. She said, Rebbe, your life, that saved me. So Bechlal, to have a Tzelem Elokim, as mentioned before, and to look the part of a Yid who is devoted to the Eibishter, and he knows what he's doing in this world, and the beard is a testimony to that. And the Rebbe in his letters emphasizes so much, as mentioned before, about the Yud Gimel Midas Harachmim, Yud Gimel Tikunei Dikna. There are letters and people wrote to the Rebbe that they're having a hard time with a Shidduch, and perhaps the eight says they should trim their beard. Having a hard time with Parnassa, and perhaps the eight says they should trim their beard. And the Rebbe writes back so sharply and so strongly, and he says the beard draws down the 13 attributes of mercy. Yud Gimel Tikunei Dikna, Yud Gimel Midas Harachmim. At a time when a person is looking for a Shidduch, at a time when a person needs Parnassa, at such a time you need to draw down as much heavenly mercy and heavenly compassion as you possibly can. And if Chazal tell us, if the Torah tells us, if the channel that draws down heavenly compassion and heavenly mercy, then obviously that's the way to go. Chas v'shalom, that a person should think that by trimming his beard and by trimming his containers and channels of heavenly mercy, then that way he's going to get more atzlacha. Obviously, it's just the opposite. So, Eibishter zal helfen. We should all have a lot of chassidus and nachas from our children. The Rebbe should have chassidus and nachas from all of us. And very, very speedily, when the Rebbe is in this gala and leads us out of Golus, we should be able to point at each and every one of our children and say, Zera Beirech Havaya Hema, make the Rebbe proud, make the Eibishter proud, and chassidus and nachas from all our children. The Rebbe should have chassidus and nachas from all of us.
Thank you very much, Rabbi Gordon. Thank you very much, Rabbi Farkash and Rabbi Sternberg. I want to remind everyone that Amir Tzashem next week, again at 2 o'clock, will be the continuation, part 2 and conclusion of our discussion. It was extremely, extremely illuminating, inspiring, helpful. I also want to mention that on Wednesday, Amir Tzashem, at 2 o'clock, there'll be the program for the Benois Chabad, Amir Tzashem, for those that want to join on the same link. And this program is also available on anash.org. Yasher koyach gadol to everyone, and may we all see hatzlacha and bracha in the koyches that we invest in our children's chinuch. Yasher koyach.